President Trump is not freaking out over these short-term losses. He is reassuring Americans on Truth Social that his tax cuts and spending bill will supercharge the economy once it is passed. Well, Wall Street melts down. We wanted to know how people on Main Street are feeling about Trump's efforts to bring jobs back to America. We hit the streets for this week's Talk of the Town.
Do you think other countries are ripping off the United States in trade deals?
Yes. I think so. I think everybody needs to pay their fair share.
In some ways, yeah. I think so.
What do you think should happen to countries that rip off the United States?
I think they should be held accountable in any way they could be, because y'all know the U.S. always help people, so, like, just take back what you give them and, cut them off.
You got to let other people pay, especially the European countries. They buy from China.
Would you be willing to put up with some short-term pain for some long-term job gains?
Yes, I'm already in pain.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Putting up with that right now.
As long as I don't lose all of my retirement funds, I could live with some pain.
I would, because in the long term, it's worth it.
I feel like this economy is terrible in this country, and we got to do something to straighten it out. And so in order to do that, it's going to take some short-term pain for a long-term gain.
A lot of ground to cover here. Joe, let's start with you. Some of those jobs numbers came in and they showed a lot of private sector growth, not government growth. So that was an interesting number. And then here we heard some of these folks talking about how they are monitoring their 401ks, but also willing to hang in there for some time.
And we talked about it last hour. Bears repeating how much time will they stick with this before perhaps you see the president's poll numbers, which are still pretty strong for him, especially at this point in his presidency in 2017. In his first term, he was around 37% approval. He's around 48, 49% now. We haven't seen a large shift from that yet. I think Stephen Miller, who's a senior advisor to the president, made a great point yesterday. He was on with Sandra Smith, and he said, look, we protect and defend Japan and Canada and Europe. And what do? They tariff our goods not remotely to the same extent that we tariff theirs. And the word reciprocal is something that people can generally agree with. You don't have to be an economist, just, eye for an eye, tariff for a tariff. The question is, how many countries come to the table? And many are already. But the real, and we talked about it again last hour, it bears repeating again, a deal with China ultimately will dictate this whole thing in terms of the big bet that Donald Trump is making on his presidency right now. If this works, he's going to go to the moon, and J.D. Vance is set up well for 2028. If it doesn't, as we've seen, economies bring down presidencies, whether it's Carter, whether it's George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, or Joe Biden.
Yeah, President Trump has stood with this policy well before the election. He said he was doing this. He's talked about the beautiful tariffs, and here we are. It's exactly what he said was going to happen.
Yeah, this is his philosophy. He believes it. He said so on Wednesday from the Rose Garden at the White House that the globalists, he said, would complain and that they would be wrong. So they are not turning away from this policy, and they're moving forward. I think the answer that you're seeing with the people on the street to the question about short-term pain for long-term gain is very interesting, because there are multiple people who said we're already in pain. And they are. And so they're saying, look, we're trying to straighten this out. For much of the Biden administration, the jobs numbers were growth in government. And one big part of Trump's economic agenda is to re-privatize the U.S. economy. For years and years and years, it's been propped up by government spending, by new jobs being federal government jobs, and that's coming to an end. And so there's kind of a reset happening here. And I think on the issue of China, but also more broadly, when you have Secretary of State Marco Rubio talking about this, he's not on the economic side of this. He's on the national security, foreign policy side of this argument. And when he says we have to be able to make things in America, he's right. I mean, our pharmaceuticals are not made here. We don't have steel mills that can produce in a time of global conflict. There's a lot of national security implications for this policy as well.
Yes, and I think a lot of people agree with that idea that we have to be able to sustain big portions of our economy ourselves. Here's the president on Truth Social. He had this to say. He also has a very specific philosophy here regarding the Fed. This would be a perfect time for Fed Chairman Jerome Powell to cut interest rates. He is always late, but he could now change his image and quickly. Energy prices are down, interest rates are down, inflation is down, even eggs are down 69%, and jobs are up all within 2 months. A big win for America. Cut interest rates, Jerome, and stop playing politics. Will the Fed listen? The Fed swears independence.
Probably not, right? And that's not the role of the Fed chairman to respond to that sort of political pressure.
Right.
You might agree with Trump's argument on the substance of it. Trump definitely wants that boost to the economy and get that rate cut. On the jobs point that the president made and the jobs report that we were just talking about that came out yesterday, the March jobs report, it was much better than expected, significantly better than expected. You saw the labor secretary sort of touting that in the sound that we played of her. Of course, this all happened before the tariffs, so it's important to say that. But, Katie, to your point, not only was it a beat in terms of many more jobs created than the markets were expecting in March, it was overwhelmingly private sector job growth. This was a good, healthy jobs report driven by the private sector, which is exactly what so many of us have been wanting to see, particularly after the last couple of years.
Yeah.